It has been over 1,000 days since the Ukraine-Russia war began. In a major shift in this long war, Ukraine has for the first time used the American long-range missile system ATACMS against Russian targets. The Russian president had threatened to escalate the war over the use of U.S. and NATO missiles. But Ukraine and the U.S. did not care. On Tuesday, November 19th, Ukraine fired 6 ATACMS ballistic missiles at Russia's southwestern region of Bryansk. According to Kiev's claim, they have targeted a Russian military warehouse that is an arms depot. This is the attack you will see is going to expand the battle, because Russian President Vladimir Putin will not remain silent on this. Already seeing the war nearing its end, he has intensified his attacks. On November 17th, they had launched the largest attack on Ukraine in 2 years, firing 200 missiles and drones at Ukrainian energy targets. These missiles were launched at several targets from north to south. Russia's strategy in this war is to hit the enemy's energy, military, and economic sectors, instead of massacring the Ukrainian people, because only it can achieve the purpose of war. And Ukraine is rapidly losing its resources. This would benefit Russia by facing a more vulnerable Ukraine in any possible negotiations. In the November 17th attack, Russia also caused irreparable damage to Ukraine's major energy company DTEK. Ukraine, which has already been largely plunged into darkness, has been without electricity for several days in many cities. It has now run into more trouble, as Ukraine is a highly cold region, and winter season has set in that will stay in full force for the next 6 months. All of this clearly shows that the battlefield advantage is on Russia's side, not on Ukraine's side at all. To improve the same position, U.S. President Joe Biden took an important strategic policy shift. The policy shift was that before November 17th, the United States, France, and Germany virtually agreed that they will provide heavy weapons to Ukraine to use them only for defense. These will not be weapons for deep strikes inside Russia. But now President Joe Biden, in the final days of his presidency, has given Ukraine permission to use its long-range missile attack system to launch strikes inside Russia. Well, you saw it did. France already transferred its long-range Scout missiles to Ukraine in July. They are few in number, but it did. It had previously advocated that Ukraine should also be allowed to use long-range missiles for strikes. However, due to the non-acceptance of Germany and the United States, it was also unable to give open permission. Germany, the third major ally, was not in favor. It was also not ready to hand over its 500 kilometers long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine. But it is not yet. According to the German Chancellor, they do not want to fuel war by attacking with their missiles inside Russia. In other words, he wanted to reduce the chances of a third world war. That's why, for the first time in 2 years on Friday, November 15th, he spoke on the phone with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He asked the Russian president to come to meaningful talks with Ukraine to end the war. At the same time, to maintain the pressure, he also said that Germany will stand behind Ukraine anyway, now that Russia has the battlefield advantage in the war. So most of the Russian terms in any ceasefire negotiations were to be accepted. Russia will emerge as the clear winner. In such a situation, the Ukrainians are also very angry at the German Chancellor's call, because it gives a clear impression that a powerful military power in Europe is withdrawing from its ally Ukraine and is starting to talk about a ceasefire with the enemy. But the fact is that the German Chancellor, from day one, is against blind aid to Ukraine and wants to save Europe from a military conflict with Russia, because Russian President Vladimir Putin has threatened before and now that if the U.S. and other NATO countries help Ukraine, it will be considered as NATO's attack on Russia. Remember that earlier in such a situation has also threatened nuclear war. The irony is that, like its previous threat against making Ukraine NATO member that may trigger war, and America did not take it seriously, the same Putin's threat is not being taken seriously on allowing Ukraine the use of long-range missiles. Immediately after the authorization of the long-range missile defense system, A message came from the close circles of the Russian president that if an attack by American or French missiles inside Russia, a world war could break out. This is the same threat that the Russian president has given in other words, that European and American countries will be considered attackers, so they would be responded accordingly. Russia has the largest number of nuclear warheads in the world, about 4,000, and no one wants to see a situation where one power has to use nuclear weapons as a last resort. So not taking this Russian threat seriously is very nonsense. And the Western powers, especially the United States and France, have made this mistake. The most severe reaction has come that Russia has also changed one of its most important policies. And this policy is the nuclear doctrine. Yes, until now Russia's nuclear doctrine was that Russia would use nuclear weapons only if another nuclear power attacked its nuclear assets, or the sovereignty of the Russian motherland would be threatened. But now President Putin has approved a new policy, a new doctrine. That is, if a non-atomic power aligned with an atomic power will threaten the security of motherland Russia, then nuclear weapons can be used against it. The world has moved another step towards a terrible war. In this, the weak government of Ukraine and the country are in danger in the first place. Now the question is, can the new U.S. President Donald Trump change this equation? Will he reverse this whole issue? Or this issue is even not in his hands? Let's see now. On the day Donald Trump won the U.S. presidential election, the news also reached soldiers fighting on the Ukraine-Russia front. After that, different dark humors, jokes, etc. were circulated among the soldiers and civilians. People began to say, "Start packing. The war is going to stop in 24 hours." Behind this was Donald Trump's rhetoric, made in July and November of the same year, in which he stated that if he became the president of America, he could end the Russian-Ukraine war in a day. Even though the UN Russian official also said sarcastically that, "No, you can't do that." But Donald Trump insists that he can do this magic. He is so optimistic about this that even before he was officially elected, he had a phone conversation with Ukrainian President Zelensky and have his biggest financial backers, Elon Musk, next to him. What was discussed? No side shared its details, but Zelensky's statement suggests that Donald Trump discussed what Ukraine's terms might be for ending the war. This is also confirmed by his second call to Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan around the same time. If these two are seen together, it can be understood that the details of the failed peace deal of last April, in which Turkey almost made a ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, and Trump may want to know that conditions. So now that Donald Trump has been elected and will take charge of the White House on January 20th next year, what will he do in pursuing his first priority, that is, ending the Ukraine-Russia war? Now, one way to end the war or ceasefire is to force one party to give up, to surrender. Obviously, the war will end, but this can only be done with a weak party. And the weak party in this conflict is Ukraine. We do not believe that Ukraine can be forced to surrender. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made it clear several times that he will never be willing to cede his land to Russian occupation. He will not make territorial compromises. He has said this. So Donald Trump cannot easily convince Ukraine on the current battle lines. Put aside this way of stopping the war. Now coming to the other case, can Russia be forced or persuaded by the new U.S. President Donald Trump to come to negotiate and stop the attacks in the meantime? Yes, Trump can do. And Putin has said it many times, that if two guarantees are given, he will come to negotiations. The first is that Ukraine will never be included in NATO. Second, the part that Russia has won in Ukraine will not be returned. That is, peace is possible on these terms of the Russian president. Now this is the second case on which negotiations can begin, but we know the situation. President Zelensky will not accept it in any case. This means that the current Ukrainian president will have to be replaced by someone else first, by re-election, etc. However, the news coming from the battlefield from the Ukrainian media, it seems that if Russia can give a good face-saving to the Ukrainians, then the Ukrainian army will be ready for a ceasefire. Evidence of this has just come to light from a Ukrainian war journalist, Natalia. This Ukrainian journalist, who has spent some time on the front line with her soldiers, says that the Ukrainian soldiers are really tired from the long war. Still, they are not at all in favor of dealing with Putin. The second part of this news can easily be ignored, because an exhausted army cannot demand the replacement of a victorious enemy leader. In other words, the resistance force of the Ukrainian state is tired and sees that after the U.S. election, a new world with new realities has appeared. They will have to deal accordingly, so that whatever is left over should moped up, and the honor of the prestigious is saved on some dignified terms. Another proof of this is from the news published on BBC, in which Ukrainian President Zelensky said that he thinks that the war will end soon with the arrival of Donald Trump. Donald Trump will try to do the same. Keep in mind the German Chancellor's phone call to the Russian president and the negotiations for a ceasefire. All this news suggests is that at least two Western powers want Russia to consider giving Ukraine a fine face-saving deal to end the war. At the same time, they are giving the impression that if Russia does not agree, then we are standing with Ukraine. Well, let me tell you one thing, friends. In the 1,000 days of war, and despite 16,000 sanctions, the way Putin has won this war has made the alliance between Europe and America very weak. President Putin will exploit this weakness, but not overexploit it. That is, he will definitely give some face-saving to Ukraine, that he can give Ukraine a security guarantee on its promise to remain neutral. Second, in Crimea and regions occupied by Russia, here he will be ready to grant special rights to the Ukrainian population, or these areas should be given the status of autonomous regions or semi-autonomous regions within Russia. The third concession he can make is that whatever destruction inside Ukraine, he will be willing to contribute to its reconstruction. By giving some such fee savings, he can get back his 1,300 prisoners in exchange for 6,000 Ukrainian prisoners. Friends, these are some fee savings possible, or like that if Donald Trump convinces Ukraine. The war can be stopped quickly. In any such case, only two people will be winners. One is President Putin for achieving all his war aims. First, Ukraine did not become a member of NATO. And secondly, he annexed a good portion of the Russian population into Russia. The other winner would be Donald Trump, who, according to his biggest foreign affairs promise, ended the war in Ukraine. But the real loss of this deal will be to President Zelensky of Ukraine and overall to Europe after him. Yes, it would be the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 that Russian forces entered a country and emerged victorious. Remember, in the 1980s, Soviet Russia collapsed because its forces were trapped in Afghanistan by the U.S. and its allies for too long. Where then in 10 years, it was completely shattered. But now, if the war in Ukraine is ended in any case, then the power of modern Russia has been proven over Europe. It has been determined that the NATO powers, with all their might, and despite killing and wounding nearly 400,000 Ukrainians, could not take back an inch of land from Russia. The very small region of Kursk, a few kilometers long, occupied by Ukrainian forces, would have to be returned in any deal without much benefit, because the battlefield advantage is hugely in Russian favor. In the favor of Russia, if Kursk is not evacuated, the war will not stop. Europe and America will have to blow several $100 billion into this blind well. This situation for America and Europe plunged into inflation, and for Canada and Great Britain, which are stuck in the housing crisis, is extremely difficult. But another message will also go out with it around the world if the deal is reached. That message is one that no American ally can rely on it anymore. Yes, in 2021, the U.S. fled, leaving its ally Ashraf Ghani's Afghan government at the mercy of the Taliban. And now, 3 years later, after giving all hope to Ukraine, spending money and preparing to run away from here too, and that too on Russia's terms. as it happened there on the Taliban's terms. A ceasefire in Ukraine on Russian terms would be taken for Taiwan, the Philippines, Israel, and South Korea. That the U.S. stands by as long as smaller groups attack them, even with diplomatic support. But if a major power attacked the American allies, so no guarantee is how long America would support them, because America will not live up to its promise. In the next election, it will be decided by the mood of its voters. If the new president gets the vote to stay out of the war, he will get out of the war using any face-saving formula. In Afghanistan, the whole world has seen that the U.S. did not consider it appropriate to formally inform its ally Ashraf Ghani's government about the negotiations. Donald Trump's fanatical Vice President J.D. Vance is now saying similar things. That another Afghanistan and Ukraine. He has said many times that it does not make difference to him what happens to Ukraine. That is, whether it wins or loses by withholding American support. Donald Trump on November 11th has selected as his chief security advisor. Congressman Mike Waltz has also been questioning Ukrainian military funding throughout the year. He has been calling it a burden on the American economy. He and the rest of the Trump team also consider the Ukraine war a burden. So the logical thing is that the Trump team, without any lengthy homework, will rush to end this war and deal with their domestic issues, such as immigration, abortion, etc. Because he has said that they not leave his territory to Russia, will not accept any ceasefire. In other words, keeping the existing front line intact, and keeping the position of the force, is not ready to accept them as border. There were reports in some places that Zelensky had accepted the geographical changes on certain conditions. However, according to the main Ukrainian newspapers, his office denies this, that President Zelensky is ready to accept a ceasefire on the current battle lines. By the way, where are these battle lines now? Let's look at it on the map. This part of the map in brown color is Russia, that is, part of its geography. Also, the red area inside Ukraine has been occupied by Russia for the past 3 years, since February 2021, from top to bottom. Most of the major regions, such as Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, are firmly held by Russia. Farther south, in the south, lies Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2014 and remains intact. So, adding this total, now Russia has 18% of the territory of Ukraine. On the other hand, if you look here at the border of Russia and Ukraine, you will see that it is a very short area of 27 kilometers in length and width, which was occupied by Ukraine in August of the same year with the help of Western allies. Ukraine has strengthened its position here. It has been here for 4 months, but so far the Russian forces have not attacked and tried to remove them. But this is such a small and insignificant area that Russia is not in a hurry to counterattack here, because by deploying its best resources here, Ukraine has weakened the rest of its front line. Most of the fighting on this front line is taking place around Sumy. There are supply lines routes near it, and Russia attacks them, while Ukrainian forces intercept the attack and counterattack, but they are unable to retake the land. Over the past year, Russia has made little headway, advancing, and seized Ukrainian land, a few hundred meters in some places, and somewhere in kilometers. You may ask here, what will be the result of the U.S. policy shift, in which Ukraine is now using long-range missiles against Russia? Now, with the American long-range missile system ATACMS, it is possible that Ukraine can hit targets up to 320 kilometers inside Russia. The most important targets of Russia in these 320 kilometers is the bridge connecting Crimea with Russia. If the bridge is demolished, Russia will be cut off from one of its most important military bases by land. Its forces will become unsafe. Apart from this, there are Russian military air bases and ammunition depots in this area, which can be attacked. But the point is, it is no longer a surprise for Russia that Ukraine has been given missile systems with a range of 300 to 500 kilometers and permission to use them. Russia has already shifted its major aircraft and major depots away from the area. The place where Ukraine attacked was not Russia's main and major weapon depot. You can also take into account that the on-paper power of weapons is one thing, while the on-ground operational capability is something else. It is often at a low level. That's why, to long-range missile systems, Ukraine will have to fire them from far away from its border, from at least 100 to 150 kilometers inland, so can understand that any possible target inside Russia-Ukraine has to hit with long-range missiles will actually not be in the range of 300 and 350 kilometers, but 200 and 250 kilometers. Yes, if France gives its 500 kilometers range Scout missile system in large numbers, which it is giving, then Ukraine will be able to hit targets in Russia up to 400 kilometers. But here is a problem, that even with these long-range missiles, the battlefield equation still doesn't change. There will be no paradigm shift in war. Even by firing 50, 100, or 200 missiles, Ukraine cannot reduce Russia's counterattack capability. Russia, due to its large geography, population, and resources, will easily withstand all these blows and will get the justification to respond strongly to Europe for providing long-range missiles. How will it respond? One, by changing its nuclear doctrine, but it can go further. How is that? It is like that as Europe and the United States have given long-range missile systems to its enemies. Russia can do the same by helping the enemies of the United States and Europe. It can sell the score by providing North Korea, Iran, Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, and others with a missile defense system or similar technology. Secondly, it's so far not launched a major sustained attack on the western region of Ukraine. It has made sporadic attacks, but no barrage attack. So Russia can now attack this part also on the border of Poland, because the long-range missile system that Russia has is much better than the systems that Ukraine has. Its operators are more experienced, and Russian missiles are also more in numbers. It can do both these actions. So we can say that Joe Biden has made a move that will inflame the war instead of ending it, and it will flare up, not benefit Ukraine at all. It will not even for a bargain, because the Russian victory momentum is so high that a few long-range missiles cannot force it to compromise. In fact, Biden has created problems for the new president, Donald Trump. At the same time, Western allies have also started another propaganda that North Korean forces are fighting together with the Russian army in the Kursk region. Although there is no evidence of this, South Korea and the Ukrainian military says it is happening, and America also confirms it with its intelligence. In response, Russia has called it another fake news and said that it has a strategic partnership with North Korea. That's all. It has not come up with any details on it. It shows that Russia has not outright denied the presence of North Korean forces. Now, it sounds like North Korean forces are present, but involved in preparations for a mission that has yet to be launched, or they are still at some distance from the battle lines, and some planning is going on. These forces will likely be involved in the preparation to take back the occupied part of the Kursk region. The presence of 10,000 to 12,000 North Korean forces here does not make a big difference, but it gives a huge advantage to two countries, Russia and North Korea. Russia, by getting manpower on the battlefield, which diminishes the effect of war on its own people, and to North Korea, which after decades is experiencing a real war. This is why their first enemy, South Korea, is very worried. It has been repeatedly calling the Russian ambassador to ask for North Korean forces to be sent back, because it can cause problems for it. So, friends, this is a situation on the battlefield where the war is going on, which can turn into World War III with a slight mistake by anyone. Einstein said, "I don't know how World War III will be fought, but I do know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." Obviously, he was referring to thousands of nuclear bombs that will reverse the entire development of the world and take humanity to the Stone Age. Battlefield stories and propaganda only appeal to those who are sitting outside the war. The war fighters wait every moment for the war to end, and never want war again. Wars don't decide right or wrong. They just decide who will survive.